and welcome. So engagement planning is critical to effective internal auditing. And today we are going to cover a good series on engagement planning, series 2200, which is very useful for all the internal auditors, particularly the supervisors who are managing a team of internal audit and multitasking on several assignments, or who are actually managing an assignment from end to end. This is series comprised of around 6 standards, which are 2200 engagement planning, 2201 planning considerations, engagement objectives, engagement scope, engagement resource allocation, and last one 2240 is engagement work program. So let's begin with asking some interesting questions relevant to this standard and get responses to those while we review this standard. What components an engagement plan should have? How engagement objectives will be linked to risk? How understanding the annual audit plan helps in planning and engagement? What is the basic purpose to communicate the engagement scope to management? If you're new to my videos, this is Tausif Mushtaq, an audit strategist, control specialist, and board advisor with over 2 decades of experience in governance, risk assurance, controls, fraud examination, and forensic reviews. The objective of my videos on audit and assurance series is to promote the internal audit profession in its basic spirit, whereby the internal auditors having a clear understanding of the standards and IPPF overall, so they can contribute to achieve the mission of internal audit. And the mission of internal audit is defined by the Institute of Internal Auditors, which is to promote, to enhance and protect the organizational value by providing risk-based and objective assurance, advice, and insight. So let's quickly begin with what is the basic requirement of standard 2200 engagement planning. As per the requirement of engagement planning, standard 2200 is that the internal auditor must develop and document a plan for each engagement, including the engagement's objectives, scope, timing, and resource allocation. The plan must consider the organization's strategies, objectives, and risks relevant to the engagement. Why understanding of the planning aspect and the annual audit plan is important? As per implementation guide, when planning an audit engagement, internal auditors typically begin with an understanding of the organization's annual internal audit plan, an awareness of the planning and discussions that led to its development. You can refer to the implementation guide of 2010 planning, and also you may refer to my videos which is covering the standard 2010. And also the internal auditor should get an understanding of any significant changes affecting the organization since the audit engagement was included in the annual internal audit plan. So the understanding includes the understanding of the internal audit plan, which is annually being built, or maybe a strategic plan for 3 years. Also the understanding the engagement planning process as defined in the policy and procedure manual. Also understanding organization's strategies, objectives, and risks impact which impact the internal audit engagement. There are some other factors which internal audit needs to understand, particularly specific to the engagement they are going to perform. They need to understand the engagement's scope, the stakeholders' expectations, and become familiar with prior audits, for example, internal or external auditors or any other review has been conducted. Other than that, compliance reviews conducted in the area under review, the strategies, objectives, and risk related to the department, area, or the process to be reviewed in the upcoming engagement. There is a possibility that the organization you are auditing is having a full-fledged established risk management department, or our management is conducted their own risk assessment. So it's better to have an understanding of that as well. It may be helpful to inquire about that, whether management has performed a risk management, when that has been performed, it has been an ample time, or it has been recently conducted, particularly in the area which is subject to audit, just to understand that what is the management's opinion on the risk assessment, as well as any related risk and controls in the area of the upcoming audit engagement. So as part of engagement planning, resource management is also an important area. The internal auditors should consider the resources needed for the engagement and determine how resources can be utilized most effectively. You may refer to my video on Standard 2030 and get more details about resource management in accordance with that standard. Also, for further guidance, we will review more standards within engagement planning, which are planning considerations, engagement objectives, scope, resource allocation, and work program, which will also help us in understanding how the resource management can be done at the engagement planning level. So to begin with, after having an understanding of the planning aspect and the risk assessment by the management, is the engagement objectives which needs to be developed. In implementing this standard 2200, it is important for the internal auditor to establish those objectives, because these are the critical part of planning. Because these engagement objectives will be linked to the risk in the area under review. We have already discussed that any recent risk assessment conducted by the management, as well as the internal audit risk assessment conducted during annual planning, will be considered. Other considerations may include previous engagement risk assessment and audit reports for the area being reviewed. Also understand that when you are developing the engagement objectives and linking them to the risk, you are mapping the key risk areas for the management, and actually you are providing assurance to the board and audit committee on those key risks once you are having your objective linked with the key risk areas. So if you go step by step, assessing the planning aspect, risk assessment of the management and risk assessment of your own, establishing the objective. Now what comes? It comes the scope of the engagement. Once the risk-based objectives have been established, the scope of the audit engagement can be determined, setting the boundaries under which the internal auditors will work. To establish the engagement objectives, internal auditors generally identify data required within the engagement scope and communicate the scope to management of the area under review, giving management ample time for the preparation of the data and providing you the adequate information, verified information. So there are some other small factors that while you are going through this process, you need to consider. Availability of key personnel. Internal auditors also communicate with management or other key personnel in the area under review to ensure availability of key personnel early in the process, so you can schedule your audits accordingly. Documentation is another important aspect that throughout the engagement planning process, internal auditors typically retain documentation from discussions and conclusions reached during meetings and include such documents in the engagement working papers. This is a normal practice in Big Four and in so many other firms that they have a different audit planning job in charge and a separate execution job in charge. So the audit planning job in charge, or if the same person is doing the audit planning part, will retain a set of documentation relevant to the audit planning, and that the same will be utilized by the person who is executing the audit. So that is again, that's why documentation at the planning stage is very important. During engagements planning stage, internal auditors will determine the level of formality and documentation needed. So if you have a well-established policy and procedure manual that will specify detailed step-by-step process of how you can include these and what templates you have to use during the audit planning process. The other important points which you need to consider while you are implementing this standard is the engagement work program. So during engagement planning, internal auditors may start to develop the work programs, giving consideration to the budget, logistics, and the final engagement communication format. Engagement results, that the chief audit executive typically determines how, when, and to whom the engagement results will be communicated You can also refer to standard 2440 disseminating the results. And normally you might be having also a distribution list, who is getting the report for what, and who is getting those and who are having the action points actually, and who is getting this information for this report for information only. Also, we need to identify the level of direct supervisory needs for the audit staff specific to engagement plan. So this is also important. Sometimes while you are referring to this standard, also you need to understand the practical purpose of this, that sometimes there are some specialized area where you need to get supervision from someone, and while for the whole assignment you are having a supervision under some specific person. For example, an IFRS related advisory is separate, and you need to knock that window within your own organization to get some advice on IFRS related areas. Otherwise, for the overall engagement, you can go as per your supervisory role. Approval for the last planning step before internal auditors start field work typically involves attaining audit management's approval of the engagement work program. However, the engagement plan, the engagement work program may be adjusted subject to approval by audit management during fieldwork when new information is obtained. And I think this is something should be flexible, because when you are at the planning phase, you are not going that in depth in certain areas, but when you are doing the audit during the fieldwork, you get further details, you reach to more staff, you get further insights, and then you are in a better position if there is an adjustments required. So that is also during the assignments, a timely adjustments will be considered, and that has to be taken care of. So how to demonstrate conformance with this standard? We know that for all standards we are covering this part, and why this is important, that when we are going through an internal assessment under standard 1300 or an external assessment, this is the section which will help us in giving the information and retaining the information. So let's see standard 2200, what is the requirement to show and display the conformance with standard 2200. A documented engagement plan that covers the planning considerations, engagement scope, objective, resource allocation, and the approved engagement work program. So either you are maintaining a hard copy, or you are having an audit management solution, or you are maintaining simply in your MS Office all this data. You need to have a separate folder within that audit engagement data to have an audit planning section, which is identifying within audit planning section all those details, all those works which we have done, including the resource allocation, your scope, objectives and scopes, and also the approvals of those engagement documents. An internal audit policies procedure manual, which may include approved documentation templates related to to planning the engagement. Documentation may include notes from the planning meetings that preceded the engagement, such as minutes, attendees, engagement time frame, resources available, and the key items. Such notes are typically documented in engagement work papers. You might have also audios recorded if these are covered within the approved parameter, and so you may also have the recordings of that for important meetings. Other than that, your notes will do the work. Additionally, communications to engagement client regarding the upcoming engagement, such as communications that discuss engagement objectives and scope, may demonstrate conformance. Any documentation from an opening or kickoff meeting after the development of this engagement work program may also serve to show conformance with this standard 2200. Additional evidence of conformance is described in the implementation guide for the standards covered under this series. So all those remaining 5 standards we will cover rest of the part, and all together you can have a proper understanding of how to demonstrate conformance under this series. So thank you so much for staying in till the end and having the knowledge of engagement planning standard 2200. Please share my videos. Let other people get benefit from these videos, and also share my channel so other people can subscribe and get more information, as a lot of new videos are coming and they will also be useful for a lot of our colleagues and or our upcoming students in our fraternity, and we need to help all of them and share this knowledge as much as we can. Thank you so much.